The shovel hit something solid beneath the dry Colorado earth, and Natalie Reed's heart stopped for one breathless moment before hammering against her ribs like a wild thing trying to escape. She had been digging for 3 hours in the blazing August sun of 1882, her dress soaked through with sweat, her hands blistered and bleeding, following the cryptic map she had found tucked inside her late father's Bible. He had been a lawman once, before the drink took him, and among his few possessions she discovered after his death was this strange piece of paper with landmarks and distances marked in his own hand, along with a single notation that read, "Dutch Henry's take from the Leadville job, 1879. St. Elmo, Colorado sat high in the mountains, a silver mining town that had boomed and was already beginning its slow decline. Natalie had come here 6 months ago to care for her dying father, leaving behind nothing in Kansas but debts and bad memories. At 23 years old, she had expected to spend her life as a seamstress, unmarried and unremarkable. But now her shovel scraped against wood and possibility itself seemed to crack open like an egg. The box was smaller than she expected, barely 2 feet long and a foot wide, but heavy enough that she struggled to lift it from the hole. Her fingers trembled as she worked the rusty lock with a rock, finally breaking it open with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet mountainside clearing. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were stacks of bills and small leather pouches that clinked with the unmistakable sound of coins. Natalie sat back on her heels, dizzy with disbelief and the altitude and the sheer impossibility of what lay before her. She counted it 3 times before she believed it. $12,000 in bills and gold coins. A fortune. More money than she had ever imagined holding in her entire life. Her father's note explained that Dutch Henry Bourne, a notorious outlaw, had hidden his take from a bank robbery here before being shot down by lawmen near Denver. Her father had been part of the posse that tracked him, but had kept the knowledge of the loot's location to himself. Too honest to take it while he wore a badge, too practical to reveal it to others. Natalie reburied the empty hole and carried the box back to town wrapped in an old blanket, her mind racing with possibilities and dangers. She could not simply appear with this wealth without raising questions. St. Elmo was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, and a poor seamstress suddenly flush with cash would draw attention from the law and the lawless alike. She needed to be smart about this, careful and methodical. The boarding house where she rented a room sat at the end of Main Street, a weathered building run by a widow named Mrs. Henderson, who asked few questions as long as the rent came on time. Natalie hid the box under the loose floorboard beneath her narrow bed and lay awake all night, listening to every creak and footstep, imagining bandits breaking down her door or the sheriff arriving with questions she could not answer. Over the next week, she formed a plan. She would use the money slowly, building something legitimate that could explain her improved circumstances. St. Elmo needed many things as mining operations expanded and contracted with the price of silver. She had skills with a needle and thread, but more than that, she had spent years watching the economics of small towns, understanding what people needed and what they would pay for. The old mercantile on Main Street had stood empty for 2 months since its owner died without heirs. The building was solid, with good bones and a prime location, but it needed work. Natalie approached the bank carefully, inquiring about the property as though she were merely curious. The price was $800, a sum that should have been impossible for her, but that she could now manage if she played this right. She started by taking in more sewing work, making it known that she was saving towards something. She mended shirts for miners, hemmed dresses for the few respectable women in town, and charged fair prices that built a reputation for quality work. After 2 weeks, she mentioned to Mrs. Henderson that her grandmother back in Kansas had passed away and left her a small inheritance. It was a lie that tasted bitter on her tongue, but necessary. Mrs. Henderson, naturally sympathetic and grateful for Natalie's consistent rent payments, helped spread the word in the way that only a well-connected widow could. By the time Natalie approached the bank again about purchasing the old mercantile, the groundwork had been laid. The banker, Mr. Thornton, regarded her with the skepticism that all men seem to hold toward women with ambitions, but her money was real and her manner was serious, and he could not refuse a legitimate offer. The day she received the deed to the building, Natalie stood in the dusty interior and allowed herself one moment of pure triumph. This was hers. Built on stolen money, perhaps, but Dutch Henry Bourne had robbed banks that foreclosed on families and hoarded wealth while people starved. She could not bring herself to feel too guilty about using his ill-gotten gains to build something good. But standing in the empty building, looking at the scope of work needed to transform it into a functioning store, she felt the first flutter of doubt. The roof leaked in 3 places. The front window was cracked. The shelves were broken and the back room was filled with debris. She had money but no experience with carpentry, no knowledge of suppliers or inventory, no understanding of how to run a business beyond the simple mathematics of income and expense. That was when Jackson Stone walked into her life like destiny, wearing dusty boots and a shy smile. He appeared in her doorway on a Tuesday morning, hat in hand, his brown eyes taking in the disaster of the space with a practiced assessment. He was perhaps 26 or 27, tall and lean in the way of men who worked outdoors, his sun-darkened face suggesting countless hours under the Colorado sky. His clothes were worn but clean, and there was a gentleness in his expression that immediately set him apart from the rough miners and drifters who made up most of St. Elmo's male population. "Heard you bought this place," he said, his voice a low drawl with traces of Texas in the vowels. "I am looking for work, and it seems like you might be looking for help." Natalie straightened from where she had been examining the broken shelves, suddenly aware of how she must look with her hair escaping its pins and dust streaking her face. "What kind of work do you do?" "Ranch work, mostly. Grew up on a cattle operation outside Austin, but I have done some carpentry, some building, whatever needs doing. I am good with my hands and I do not mind hard work." He gestured at the space around them. "This needs considerable fixing before it will be fit for business." She should have been more cautious, should have asked for references or credentials, but something in his straightforward manner inspired trust. Or perhaps it was simply the overwhelming relief of having someone offer help when she needed it so desperately. "I cannot pay much," she said honestly. "Not until the store is actually running and making money." Jackson shrugged, a slight smile touching his lips. "I am not asking for much, just fair wages and honest work. Maybe $3 a day once we get started, and I will take $2 a day until then. That seemed reasonable." It was more than reasonable. It was generous to the point of suspicion, and Natalie studied him more carefully, looking for the angle, the hidden motive. But his expression remained open and earnest, his hands turning his hat in a nervous gesture that spoke of genuine need for employment rather than any darker scheme. "Why are you in St. Elmo?" she asked. "This is not much of a cattle town. Followed work up here when the ranch I was on went under. Thought maybe I would try mining, but that is not for me. Too much time underground, not enough sky. I have been doing odd jobs, but nothing steady. Heard Mrs. Henderson mention you were fixing to open a store, and I thought maybe that was something I could help with." He met her eyes directly. I give you my word I am a hard worker and honest. You can ask around about me. I have been here 2 months and never caused any trouble." Natalie made her decision with a speed that surprised herself. "All right, we can try it for a week and see how it goes. If the work is good, we will continue. My name is Natalie Reed, Jackson Stone." He extended his hand and she shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip tempered by obvious care not to hurt her smaller hand. "When do we start?" "Right now," she said, and saw his smile widen into something that transformed his serious face into something almost handsome. They started with the roof, because the autumn rains would come soon, and everything else would be wasted if water continued to pour through the gaps. Jackson borrowed a ladder from the livery stable and spent 2 days on the roof, replacing shingles and sealing seams with tar, while Natalie worked inside clearing debris and taking inventory of what could be salvaged. She caught herself watching him work more than once, admiring the efficient economy of his movements, the way he approached each problem with calm assessment rather than frustration. In the evenings, she would climb the ladder to bring him water or coffee, and they would talk while he took a break. She learned that he was 27, the youngest of 4 brothers, all of whom had scattered after their father died, and the ranch was sold to cover debts. He had drifted through New Mexico and Colorado for 2 years, working where he could, never staying anywhere long because nothing felt like the right place to put down roots. "What about you?" he asked on the 3rd evening, sitting on the roof's edge with his legs dangling over the side, the setting sun painting the mountains around them in shades of gold and purple. "How does a young woman from Kansas end up buying a store in St. Elmo?" She told him the story she had prepared, about the inheritance from her grandmother, about wanting to build something of her own rather than spending her life working for others. The lies came easier now, smoothed by repetition, but she felt a pang of guilt at deceiving this earnest man who had offered nothing but honest help. "That is admirable," Jackson said. "Most people just talk about their dreams. You are actually doing something about yours." "I do not have much choice," Natalie said quietly. "There is nothing for me back in Kansas. This is my chance to build a real life. Then we will make sure this store is the best one in the mountains," Jackson declared with such simple confidence that she found herself believing him. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Jackson arrived each morning at dawn and worked until dark, repairing shelves, fixing the broken window, reinforcing the floor in the back room, building a counter from salvaged wood that he sanded and polished until it gleamed. Natalie worked alongside him when she could, learning to hammer nails straight and saw boards even, though her real focus was on the business side of things. She spent evenings writing to suppliers in Denver and Colorado Springs, negotiating terms for inventory, planning what products would sell best in a mountain mining town. She paid Jackson his promised wages from her hidden stash, careful to make it seem like she was budgeting carefully from her supposed inheritance. He never asked probing questions, never showed undue curiosity about her finances, and gradually, her wariness of him began to fade into something warmer and more dangerous. Because somewhere between the roof repairs and the shelf building, between shared meals eaten sitting on sawhorses and conversations that stretched into the soft summer evenings, Natalie found herself falling for Jackson Stone. It crept up on her slowly, a warmth in her chest when she saw him, a tendency to listen for his footsteps, a disappointment on Sundays when he did not work and the day felt empty without his presence. She tried to convince herself it was simply gratitude, simply the natural camaraderie of working toward a shared goal, but she could not ignore the way her breath caught when he smiled at her, The way her skin tingled when their hands accidentally touched passing tools, the way she found herself imagining what it would be like if he kissed her. It was dangerous and foolish, she told herself sternly. She was building her life on a foundation of stolen money and lies. She had no business dragging an honest man like Jackson into her complicated situation. But the heart, she discovered, cared little for such practical considerations. The store opened in mid-September, 3 weeks ahead of her most optimistic schedule, thanks to Jackson's tireless work. The shelves were stocked with canned goods, fabric, tools, tobacco, coffee, flour, sugar, and all the other necessities that miners and families needed. She had negotiated credit terms with suppliers that gave her flexibility, and she kept her prices fair, undercutting the larger store at the other end of town by small margins that added up for working families. Jackson stayed on to help run the store, and Natalie adjusted his wages to $4 a day, making him essentially a partner in the operation, though they never formalized it with paperwork. He had a natural ease with people that complemented her more reserved nature, chatting with customers about mining conditions and weather and news from other camps, while she managed the inventory and accounts. The store proved successful almost immediately. St. Elmo's population fluctuated with the fortunes of the mines, but there were enough steady residents to provide reliable business, and Natalie's reputation for fair dealing spread quickly. By the end of the first month, they were turning a genuine profit, and she felt some of her constant anxiety begin to ease. On a cool evening in early October, after they had closed the store and were doing the daily accounts, Jackson cleared his throat in a way that suggested he had been building up to saying something. "Natalie, can I ask you something personal?" She looked up from the ledger, her pulse quickening. "You can ask. Why do you never talk about your family back in Kansas? In all these months you have barely mentioned them. I know your father and grandmother passed, but you never speak of anyone else. No siblings, no friends, no one you write to or hear from." The question caught her off guard, cutting too close to truths she had been careful to bury. "There is not much to tell," she said, keeping her voice level. "My mother died when I was young. I was an only child. My father was not a good man after the drink took him. I have no other family, and the friends I had were more circumstantial than genuine. This is my fresh start, and I prefer to look forward rather than back." Jackson studied her for a long moment, his brown eyes serious and searching. "I am not trying to pry. I just want you to know that if there is anything you need to talk about, anything you are carrying that is weighing on you, I am a good listener. And I do not judge people for their past." The kindness in his voice made her throat tighten with emotion. How she wanted to tell him everything, to unburden herself of the secrets she carried, to know if he would understand or if he would look at her with disappointment and walk away. But the risk was too great, the stakes too high. If the truth came out about the money's origin, she could lose everything, including her freedom if some lawman decided to make an issue of it. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know. But truly, I am fine. I am happy here building this life. Happier than I have been in a long time." "I am glad," Jackson said, and the warmth in his expression made her heart ache. "You deserve happiness, Natalie. You work so hard and you have built something really good here. I am proud to be part of it." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings and possibilities, and Natalie thought he might say something more, might cross that invisible line they had both been carefully respecting. But instead, he simply smiled and returned his attention to the accounts, and the moment passed. Winter came to the mountains with brutal swiftness. By late October, snow was falling regularly, and by November the passes were closing, isolating St. Elmo from the outside world except for the most determined travelers. Business slowed but never stopped entirely. Miners still needed supplies, families still needed food, and the store became a gathering place where people came as much for company and warmth as for goods. Natalie and Jackson fell into even closer partnership as the work of running the store in winter increased. They had to shovel snow from the front entrance each morning, keep the stove burning to prevent the store from freezing, make sure inventory did not run too low since resupply was uncertain in the winter months. Jackson moved into the small room above the store that Natalie had been using for storage, making it easier for him to help with early morning tasks and late-night emergencies. Having him living so close felt both comforting and torturous. Natalie found herself intensely aware of his presence above her own rented room, separated by floors and walls but still somehow intimate in the knowing that he was there. Some nights, she would hear his footsteps crossing the floor above and imagine what he might be doing, what he might be thinking, if he ever thought about her the way she constantly thought about him. The first real test of their partnership came in December, when a particularly harsh storm trapped the town for nearly 2 weeks. Supplies ran desperately low, and Natalie made the difficult decision to implement rationing, limiting how much of essentials like flour and coffee each family could purchase. It was deeply unpopular, but Jackson supported her decision publicly and helped her enforce it fairly. And gradually, people came to understand that she was ensuring everyone had something rather than allowing the first customers to buy everything. When the storm finally broke, and a supply wagon managed to get through from the railroad depot, the relief was palpable. Natalie restocked the shelves and lowered prices on the new inventory as a gesture of goodwill, taking a smaller profit margin to help families recover from the difficult weeks. It was good business in the long term, building loyalty and trust, but it also felt right in a way that surprised her. She had started this venture purely out of self-interest, looking for a way to legitimize stolen money. But somewhere along the way, she had begun to genuinely care about the community and her role in it. "You are a good person," Jackson told her on the evening after the supply wagon arrived, as they worked late restocking shelves. "You could have charged premium prices during the shortage. Some store owners would have. But you kept it fair, even rationed your own profits to make sure everyone was taken care of." "I could not price gouge people who are already struggling," Natalie said, embarrassed by his praise. "That would be wrong." "Yes, it would, but a lot of people do not let that stop them." "You have principles, Natalie. Real ones that you actually live by, not just talk about. That is rare." He paused in his work, turning to face her fully. "I want you to know that working here, being part of what you are building, it is the first time in a long while that I have felt like I am doing something that matters. You gave me that. This opportunity, this place, it means a lot to me." The sincerity in his voice made her heart swell and ache simultaneously. "You have done as much for this place as I have," she said. "More, probably. I could never have gotten the store ready without your help, and I certainly could not run it alone now. You are not just an employee, Jackson. You are a partner, even if we have not made it official." "Is that what you want?" he asked quietly. "To make it official, a real partnership?" Natalie felt the weight of the moment, understanding that he was asking about more than just business arrangements. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, with all the feelings they had been carefully not naming for months now. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If that is what you want too." Jackson crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, and then his hands were cupping her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch, and his eyes were searching hers for permission. "I have wanted to do this for months," he said softly. "But I did not want to presume, did not want to make things complicated between us if you did not feel the same way." "I feel the same way," Natalie breathed, and then his lips were on hers, warm and certain and perfect. The kiss started soft and questioning, but deepened quickly, as months of restrained attraction finally found release. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her close, and she threaded her fingers through his hair, learning the shape of him, the taste of him, feeling like she was finally home after years of wandering. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jackson rested his forehead against hers and laughed quietly. "I should have done that months ago." "Probably," Natalie agreed, smiling so widely her face hurt, "but it was worth the wait." They talked late into the night, sitting close on the store counter, hands intertwined, finally speaking openly about feelings they had both been harboring. Jackson told her he had fallen for her that first day, watching her stand in the disaster of the empty store with determination blazing in her eyes, too stubborn to be daunted by the impossible task ahead of her. Natalie admitted that she had been fighting her attraction to him almost from the beginning, afraid to want something good after so many disappointments in her life. "You do not have to be afraid anymore," Jackson said, kissing her hand. "I am here, and I am not going anywhere. We are in this together now, whatever comes." The promise should have comforted her completely, but Natalie felt a shadow pass over her joy, because they were not truly in this together. She was still keeping the truth about the money from him, still building their relationship on a foundation of lies. And the longer she waited to tell him, the harder it would be, the more betrayed he would feel when he eventually learned the truth. She should tell him now, she thought, while everything was new and fragile but still forgivable. But the words stuck in her throat, held back by cowardice and fear of losing this precious thing she had just found. So instead, she kissed him again and let herself believe that maybe, somehow, it would all work out without her having to confess. The winter passed in a blur of work and stolen moments of happiness. She and Jackson were careful to maintain propriety in public, mindful of small-town gossip and her reputation. But in private, they explored their growing relationship with joy and wonder. He courted her properly despite their already established partnership, bringing her small gifts, taking her on walks when the weather permitted, treating her with a respect and care that made her fall more deeply in love with him each day. By spring, everyone in St. Elmo assumed they would marry eventually, and Natalie found herself thinking about it too, imagining a future with Jackson that stretched beyond the store into real life together. Children, perhaps, and a house instead of rented rooms, and all the ordinary domestic happiness she had never expected to have. But the secret she carried cast a shadow over everything, and as their relationship deepened, her guilt grew heavier. Jackson deserved honesty. He deserved to know what he was really signing on for, what risks he might be taking by associating his future with hers. The crisis came in May, nearly a year after she had found the buried money. A federal marshal arrived in St. Elmo asking questions about Dutch Henry Bourne and his missing loot. The lawman, Marshal Davies, was methodical and thorough, interviewing anyone who had been in the area in 1879, checking land records, talking to miners who might have seen something unusual. Natalie felt her carefully constructed world tilting dangerously. She went through her days in a state of controlled panic, waiting for the marshal to appear at her door with accusations and handcuffs. Jackson noticed her distress, of course, and asked repeatedly what was wrong, but she deflected and made excuses, unable to force the truth past her terror. Marshal Davies did eventually come to the store, but only as a customer, purchasing supplies before heading back to Denver. He made no accusations, showed no suspicion, simply paid for his goods and left with a polite nod. But his presence had been enough to crack Natalie's composure, and that evening, after they closed the store, she finally broke down. Jackson found her crying in the back room, her face buried in her hands, her whole body shaking with suppressed sobs. He immediately wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close and murmuring comforting words, asking what was wrong, what had happened, how he could help. "I have to tell you something," she choked out between sobs. "Something I should have told you months ago. And when I do, you are probably going to hate me and leave, and I will deserve it. But I cannot keep lying to you anymore. I cannot." Jackson pulled back enough to look at her face, his expression serious but not angry. "Natalie, whatever it is, we will figure it out together. Just tell me, please." So she told him everything. About finding her father's map, about digging up Dutch Henry Bourne's buried loot, about using the stolen money to buy the store and build this life. She explained about the lies regarding her inheritance, about the constant fear of being caught, about the guilt that had been eating at her for months. She expected him to pull away in disgust, to storm out, to look at her with disappointment and judgment. Instead, Jackson listened quietly until she finished, his arms still around her, his expression thoughtful. When she finally fell silent, exhausted from confession, he let out a long breath. "That is quite a story," he said quietly. "I know. I am a thief and a liar, and you have every right to want nothing more to do with me." Natalie could not meet his eyes, could not bear to see the condemnation she knew must be there. "Hey, look at me." Jackson gently tilted her chin up until she had no choice but to meet his gaze. What she saw there was not anger or disgust, but something that looked almost like understanding. "You are not a thief. You found money that was already stolen, hidden by a dead outlaw who had no more use for it. That is not the same thing as stealing it yourself. But I knew it was not mine. I should have turned it in to the law. Maybe. Or maybe you did what you needed to do to survive and build a life for yourself. Dutch Henry Bourne stole that money from a bank, which had probably foreclosed on half the people who deposited there. The money was already tainted. You used it to build something good, something that helps people. That counts for something." He stroked her hair gently. "Are you planning to keep using it for selfish reasons, or are you building something worthwhile? I do not know anymore. It started as just survival, just trying to escape poverty and build security. But then it became about the store and the community and us. I wanted to do something good to make it matter. Then that is what you are doing. Look, I am not saying you made perfect choices. Maybe turning in the money would have been the more legally correct option, but I understand why you did not, and I do not think you are a bad person for it. I think you are someone who was given an impossible choice and did the best you could." He kissed her forehead gently. "And for what it is worth, I am glad you made the choices you did, because otherwise you would not be here and we would not be here, and that would be a real shame." Natalie felt tears spilling down her cheeks again, but this time from relief rather than fear. "You really do not hate me." "I could never hate you. I love you, Natalie, and that does not change because your grandmother did not actually leave you an inheritance. Though I have to say, I am impressed you managed to keep that story straight for so long. I fully believed it." Despite everything, she found herself laughing through her tears. "I hated lying to you, every single time." "Then do not do it anymore. We are partners, remember, in everything. That means honesty even when it is hard, especially when it is hard." He cupped her face in his hands, his expression turning serious. "But Natalie, we need to talk about what to do now. If the marshal is investigating, there is still risk. We need to be smart about this." They spent the next several hours discussing options and strategies. Jackson's practical cowboy mind approached the problem methodically. The money was already spent and legitimately invested in the business. The store was real, profitable, helping the community. As long as no one could directly prove where Natalie's initial capital had come from, there was no crime to prosecute. The story about the inheritance was circumstantial but plausible, and she had built enough goodwill in the community that most people would defend her reputation if questions arose. The bigger risk is if someone else was looking for that money and connects it to you, Jackson said. Dutch Henry might have had partners or associates who knew about the hiding place. That is more dangerous than the law at this point. I never thought about that, Natalie admitted, feeling fresh fear curl in her stomach. We will be careful. Keep our eyes open for anyone asking too many questions. And maybe we should think about making the partnership official and getting married. A wife cannot be compelled to testify against her husband in most circumstances, and it would give you legal protection if anything did come up. Natalie's heart skipped at the casual way he said married, as though it were obvious and settled. Are you proposing to me as a legal strategy? Jackson grinned, the tension breaking slightly. I am proposing to you because I love you and want to spend my life with you. The legal benefits are just a bonus, though I should probably do this properly. He slid off the crate they had been sitting on and knelt on one knee, taking her hand in his. Natalie Reed, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise to stand by you through whatever comes, to help you build this life you are creating, to keep your secrets and share your burdens, and to love you for the rest of my days. Yes, Natalie said without hesitation, fresh tears streaming down her face. Yes, absolutely yes. They married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in St. Elmo, with Mrs. Henderson and the store's regular customers as witnesses. Natalie wore a cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, and Jackson borrowed a proper suit from the general store owner who was roughly his size. It was not elaborate or fancy, but it felt real and right, standing before the circuit preacher and promising forever to this man, who had helped her build something from nothing and who loved her, despite knowing her secrets. They had a small reception in the store afterward, with cake that Mrs. Henderson baked and champagne that Jackson had somehow procured from Denver. The whole town seemed to show up, bringing gifts and well wishes, and Natalie felt overwhelmed by the genuine affection these people showed. She had come to St. Elmo as a stranger, alone and frightened, carrying stolen money and desperate plans. Now she was part of a community, a respected business owner, a wife with a future that felt solid and real. That night, in the room above the store that they would now share, Jackson made love to her with tenderness and passion, and Natalie felt the last pieces of her guarded heart finally open completely. She had been afraid for so long, carrying her secrets like stones in her pockets, dragging her down. But Jackson had heard the worst of her and stayed, had heard the truth and helped her figure out how to move forward. That kind of love, she realized, was more valuable than any buried treasure. Summer brought changes and challenges. The store continued to thrive, and they used the profits to make improvements and expand inventory. Natalie no longer touched the hidden money, leaving it buried beneath the floorboard as emergency funds they would hopefully never need. Everything they built now came from legitimate earnings, and there was satisfaction in that, in knowing their success was real and earned. Marshall Davies never returned, and gradually Natalie's anxiety about being discovered faded into background noise. She would probably always carry some fear, some waiting for the other shoe to drop, but Jackson's steady presence helped her manage it. He had a way of keeping her grounded, of reminding her that they were building something real and good regardless of how it started. In August, a man came to the store asking questions about properties sold in the past year and who might have come into money unexpectedly. He claimed to be a land speculator, but something about him set off alarms in both Natalie and Jackson's minds. They answered his questions carefully and vaguely, providing no useful information, and after he left, they quietly asked around town about him. It turned out the man had been seen at several other businesses, asking similar questions, and was staying at the hotel under a false name, according to the clerk who recognized him from wanted posters. He was associated with the remnants of Dutch Henry's gang, still looking for their leader's hidden score even years after his death. Jackson took immediate action, quietly gathering several trusted men in town, and suggesting that this stranger was asking too many intrusive questions and making people uncomfortable. In a small mountain town where people valued privacy and distrusted outsiders, it did not take much to create an unwelcoming atmosphere. The man left St. Elmo 2 days later, and as far as they ever knew, never returned. "You think he suspected me?" Natalie asked Jackson that evening, her old fears resurfacing. If he did, he could not prove anything, and he was not stupid enough to make direct accusations without proof. "You are a respected business owner married to a well-liked man in a tight-knit community. Even if he knew for certain, what was he going to do? He is a wanted outlaw himself. He cannot exactly go to the law." Jackson pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I think we are safe, truly safe now. Enough time has passed, the trail is cold, and you have built a legitimate life. Even if someone did figure it out, what you did was not actually prosecutable. You found abandoned money from a dead outlaw. That is a moral gray area, not a clear crime." "When did you become an expert in law?" Natalie teased, trying to lighten the mood. "When I married a woman with a complicated past and decided I needed to know how to protect her," Jackson replied with perfect seriousness, though his eyes were warm with humor. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the following months. The store required constant attention, but was reliably profitable. They hired a teenage boy to help with heavy lifting and deliveries, which freed up some of their time for other pursuits. Jackson started talking about buying land outside town, maybe running some cattle alongside the store business, diversifying their income. Natalie loved watching him plan their future with such confidence and optimism, his natural inclination toward building and growing things finding full expression now that he had a stable base. In October, Natalie realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with joy and terror in equal measures. A child meant permanence, deeper roots in this community, another person who would be affected by her choices and secrets. But it also meant family, something she had never really had, a chance to build the kind of loving home she had always dreamed of. Jackson's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her protests, his face split by the widest smile she had ever seen. "We are going to be parents," he kept saying, as though he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." They spent that evening planning nursery arrangements and discussing names, arguing playfully about whether the child would be born with her dark hair or his lighter brown, whether they would have his height or her stubbornness. It felt wonderfully normal and domestic, far removed from buried treasure and dangerous secrets. The pregnancy was relatively easy, though the altitude sometimes made breathing difficult and morning sickness lasted well into the 4th month. Jackson was attentive and protective to the point of being overbearing, insisting she rest more and not lift heavy items, taking on extra work around the store to spare her. Natalie found it both touching and occasionally annoying, but mostly she just felt grateful for a partner who cared so deeply about her well-being. Their son was born in May of 1884, 2 years after Natalie had found the buried loot that changed her life. The birth was long and difficult, attended by the town midwife and Mrs. Henderson, with Jackson pacing anxiously downstairs until the baby's first cry rang out. They named him James, after Jackson's father, and Reed for Natalie's family name as his middle name. Holding her son for the first time, Natalie felt a clarity she had never experienced before. This tiny person represented everything she had been fighting for, everything she had risked and built and hoped for. He deserved a mother who was honest and good, who lived without shame or fear. And while she could not change the choices she had already made, she could make sure that moving forward, everything she did was worthy of his trust. "I want to tell the truth," she said to Jackson one evening when James was 3 months old, sleeping peacefully in the cradle Jackson had built. "Not publicly, not in a way that would cause legal trouble, but I want to make restitution somehow. The money came from a bank robbery. Maybe we could make anonymous donations to causes that help people who have been hurt by such crimes, or support families who lost money in bank failures. Something to balance the scales." Jackson considered this carefully, rocking the cradle with one foot while he cleaned his rifle at the kitchen table. "That seems fair and good. We could set aside a portion of profits each month, funnel it through the church or other organizations so it cannot be traced back to us directly. Would that help you feel better about how everything started?" "I think so. I cannot undo what I did, but I can try to make sure some good comes from it beyond just our own comfort." They implemented the plan quietly over the following months, making regular, anonymous donations to various causes through intermediaries. It was not perfect restitution, but it helped ease Natalie's conscience, and more importantly, it taught James from his earliest days about responsibility and helping others, even if he would not understand the specifics for many years. Life continued its forward march. The store remained successful, becoming an institution in St. Elmo. Jackson did buy land outside town, starting a small cattle operation that he ran with the help of hired hands, balancing it with his store work. James grew from infant to toddler, bright and curious and affectionate, equally comfortable with customers in the store as he was with cattle in the pastures. In 1886, Natalie became pregnant again, and this time with a daughter they named Josephine after Jackson's mother. The birth was easier than James's had been, and Jo, as they called her, was a calm, observant baby who seemed to take everything in with her large brown eyes so like her father's. St. Elmo itself changed over those years. The silver mining boom began to fade as ore quality declined and prices dropped. People moved away to other opportunities, buildings stood empty, and there was a general sense of decline. But Natalie and Jackson's store remained a constant, adapting to serve the families who stayed, expanding mail-order business to supplement declining foot traffic. "We should think about whether we want to stay long-term," Jackson said one evening in 1888, after yet another family had announced they were leaving for opportunities elsewhere. "The town is shrinking. In 10 years it might be a ghost town. We have options now. We could move to a larger city, start fresh somewhere with more opportunity." Natalie looked around their comfortable home above the store, thought about the community they had built, the reputation they had established, the good they had been able to do. "I do not want to leave," she said quietly. "I know it makes more business sense to go somewhere growing rather than somewhere dying. But this is our home. These people are our friends. And there is something to be said for being the ones who stay, who keep the lights on even when it is hard. Jackson smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. I was hoping you would say that. I do not want to leave either. We will figure out how to make it work, just like we always do. They diversified further, turning part of the store into a post office and telegraph office as those services became available. Jackson expanded the ranch operation, selling beef to the remaining mines and to markets in larger towns. They weathered economic downturns and harsh winters, years when silver prices crashed and years when blizzards isolated them for months. Through it all, Natalie felt grateful for the choice she had made that day in 1882, following her father's map to buried treasure. It had started as desperation and opportunity, but it had given her everything that mattered. A home, a purpose, a man who loved her completely, children who filled her life with joy and meaning. James grew into a serious, hard-working boy who loved the ranch and seemed born to cowboy work like his father. Joe was artistic and dreamy, with a gift for drawing and a fascination with the mountains that surrounded their town. Both children worked in the store as they grew older, learning business and responsibility, never knowing that their comfortable life had been built on a foundation of stolen outlaw money. In 1892, a third child arrived, another boy they named Thomas. His birth was unexpected, as Natalie had assumed at 33 she was finished having children, but he was a welcome surprise, energetic and charming and utterly fearless. Jackson joked that Thomas would be the one to give them gray hair early, always climbing things he should not, always finding creative ways to cause benign chaos. The years blurred together in the way that years do when life is full and mostly happy. There were challenges and sorrows, setbacks and struggles, but through it all, Natalie and Jackson faced everything together, their partnership deepening with time into something unshakable. In 1895, Marshall Davies returned to St. Elmo, much older now and serving his final months before retirement. He came into the store one afternoon, and Natalie's heart seized with old fear, but his visit was purely social. He had been assigned to close out old case files and wanted to mark the Dutch Henry Bourne case as permanently unsolved. The missing loot likely scattered or hidden so well it would never be found. That money could be anywhere, he told Natalie and Jackson conversationally as he purchased coffee and tobacco. Probably spent by drifters who stumbled across it years ago, or still buried somewhere no one will ever look. The bank it was stolen from does not even exist anymore. Failed in the panic of 1893. So even if someone did find it, there would be no one to return it to. Just one of those mysteries that will never be solved. After he left, Natalie leaned against Jackson, feeling the tension drain from her body. That felt like closure, she said softly. It was closure, Jackson agreed. The past is truly past now. We can let it go completely. And she did. Over the following years, Natalie rarely thought about the buried loot or the lies she had told or the fear she had carried. That desperate young woman who had dug up a box in 1882 felt like someone else entirely, a different person from the confident business owner and mother she had become. The money had been a tool, nothing more, and what she had built with that tool was entirely her own. By 1900, St. Elmo was indeed becoming a ghost town, with fewer than 100 permanent residents. But the Stone family remained, running the store and ranch, anchoring the small community that persisted. James, now 16, was a skilled cowhand and took over much of the ranch operation. Joe, 14, had become an accomplished artist whose paintings of mountain landscapes were beginning to sell in Denver galleries. Thomas, 8, was attending the small school that still operated and causing his usual benign havoc. Natalie and Jackson, both in their early 40s now, had settled into the comfortable rhythm of long marriage. They still ran the store together, still made decisions as partners, still found ways to surprise and delight each other after nearly 2 decades together. The passion of their early days had matured into something deeper and more sustainable, a love built on trust and shared experience and genuine friendship. On a summer evening in 1901, they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains, their hands intertwined as they had been countless times before. The children were occupied with their own pursuits. The store was closed for the day. The ranch hands had finished their work. It was a moment of perfect peace. "You ever regret it?" Jackson asked quietly. "The way everything started, the choices you made?" Natalie considered the question seriously, looking back across nearly 2 decades of life. "I regret the lies," she said honestly. "I regret the fear I carried for so many years. But the core choice, to use that money to build something rather than turning it in. No, I do not regret that. It gave us this life. It gave us each other. And I think we have done more good with it than would have been done if it had simply disappeared into some government account." "I think so too," Jackson agreed. "And for what it is worth, I am grateful for whatever chain of circumstances led you to St. Elmo, to that store, to me. I was drifting before I met you, just existing without any real direction. You gave me purpose and partnership and a reason to build rather than just survive. That is a gift I can never repay." "You have already repaid it 1,000 times over," Natalie said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You helped me spend the money right, just like you said you would that first day. You helped me build something good and lasting. You loved me when I was not sure I deserved to be loved. You are the best decision I ever made, Jackson Stone." He kissed the top of her head, and they sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged in the vast Colorado sky. Inside, they could hear the children arguing about something trivial, the sounds of family and life and home. The store stood solid on Main Street, a beacon of reliability in a fading town. The ranch lands stretched beyond town, cattle grazing in mountain meadows. Everything they had built, everything they had become, spread out around them like a map of a life well lived. In 1905, James married a girl from a neighboring ranch, and Natalie became a grandmother at 46. The arrival of her first grandchild, a boy named William, brought a new dimension of joy she had not anticipated. She loved watching Jackson with the baby, seeing the gentleness he had shown their own children extended to the next generation. Joe married in 1907, a young man from Denver who appreciated her artistic gifts and supported her work. They split their time between the city and St. Elmo, and Joe continued to paint the mountains she loved. Thomas, at 15, was showing interest in the business side of things, studying their account books and asking thoughtful questions about profits and inventory management. The store adapted again, becoming more of a general trading post as the permanent population dwindled. Jackson's ranch operation actually expanded, as abandoned land became available and cattle could graze extensively across the emptying mountain valleys. They were never wealthy by city standards, but they were comfortable and secure, with assets and savings and a legacy to pass to their children. In 1910, Natalie was cleaning out old files and came across the original deed to the store building, purchased in 1882 with money from Dutch Henry Bourne's buried loot. She held the paper for a long moment, thinking about that desperate young woman she had been, alone and frightened and hoping for any chance at a better life. "What are you thinking about?" Jackson asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Just remembering." That woman I was when I came here feels like someone I read about in a book rather than actually lived. So much has changed. I have changed so much." "You grew into the person you were meant to be," Jackson said simply. "The seeds were always there. You just needed the right conditions to bloom." "And you did bloom, Natalie, into someone strong and good and admirable. Our children are lucky to have you as their mother. This community is lucky to have had you as part of it. And I am the luckiest man alive to have spent these years as your husband." She turned in his arms, looking up at his face, weathered now with age and sun, but still handsome to her eyes, still the face she most wanted to see every day. "I love you," she said simply. "Thank you for everything, for staying when I told you the truth, for helping me build this life, for giving me a family and a home and a reason to be better than I was." "I love you too," Jackson replied, and kissed her in the way he had been kissing her for nearly 30 years, familiar and perfect and home. By 1915, St. Elmo had fewer than 50 permanent residents, and there was talk of officially closing the post office. But the Stones remained, 3 generations now living in and around the dying town, sustaining the general store and ranch that had been built with an outlaw's buried treasure. The money itself was long gone, dispersed through legitimate business and charitable donations and the simple costs of living, but what it had built remained solid. James and his wife had 3 children now, running the ranch operation with skill and expanding into new markets. Joe's paintings were exhibited in galleries across Colorado, bringing modest fame and income. Thomas, at 23, had taken over day-to-day management of the store, proving to have a natural head for business and modern ideas about mail order and catalog sales that kept them viable. Natalie and Jackson, both in their mid-50s, had begun to step back from active management, letting the younger generation take over while they focused on grandchildren and the simple pleasures of a life well lived. They took long walks in the mountains, reminiscing about their early days together, telling each other stories they both already knew but never tired of hearing. "You think the children will ever know the full story?" Natalie asked one day during such a walk. "About where the money really came from. Maybe someday, when they are old enough to understand nuance and moral complexity," Jackson said. "Or maybe it will die with us, just another secret buried in the mountains. Does it matter anymore? I suppose not. Everything we built is legitimate now. The origin does not change what it became." "Exactly. You found money that was already stolen from people who were already cheated by a corrupt banking system. You used it to build something that helped people, that employed people, that served a community. That is what matters. Not the imperfect beginning, but what you made of it." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, their hands clasped, their steps matched from decades of walking together. The mountains rose around them, eternal and unchanging, witnesses to everything that had passed in the small human drama below. In 1918, the country was at war, and Thomas enlisted despite his parents' concerns. He served with distinction in France and returned in 1919, changed by what he had seen but grateful to come home to the mountains and the life they offered. His experience gave him new perspective, and he threw himself into expanding the family business with renewed vigor. The 1920s brought changes to even isolated mountain towns. Automobiles became more common, though the roads around St. Elmo remained challenging. Modern conveniences slowly made their way up the mountains. The store adapted again, stocking automobile parts and gasoline alongside traditional goods. The ranch operation mechanized, using trucks instead of horses for some work, though Jackson insisted on keeping some traditional methods alive. In 1925, on the 43rd anniversary of the day Natalie had found the buried loot, She and Jackson stood in the clearing where she had dug it up. The hole had long since filled in and grown over, leaving no trace of what had been there. She thought about that terrified young woman with bleeding hands and desperate hopes, and she wished she could go back and tell her that everything would work out better than she ever imagined. No regrets. Jackson asked as if reading her thoughts. No regrets, Natalie confirmed. Just gratitude. For this life, for you, for everything we built together. They kissed in the clearing, older now but no less devoted, their love a living thing that had grown and deepened with every passing year. The sun filtered through the pine trees, birds sang their mountain songs, and everything was exactly as it should be by 1930. Natalie and Jackson were in their 70s, still active but definitely slowing down. They had 8 grandchildren now, with more likely coming, and the first great-grandchild had been born the previous year. The family business had evolved into a small empire spanning the store, the ranch, Joe's art business, and various other enterprises that the younger generations had built on the foundation their parents established. St. Elmo was barely a town anymore, with perhaps 20 permanent residents, but the Stone family compound kept it alive. The old store still operated, now more of a tourist curiosity for people driving through the mountains than a necessary business. But Thomas kept it going partly out of sentiment and partly because it still turned a small profit. On a crisp autumn day in 1932, Natalie sat on the porch with Jackson, watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard, their laughter echoing off the surrounding peaks. She was 73 now, her hair white and her hands gnarled with arthritis, but she had never felt more content. "We did good, did we not?" she said to Jackson, who at 77 still had the same gentle brown eyes that had captured her heart 50 years ago. "We did great," Jackson agreed. "Look at all of this. 3 generations of family, all thriving, businesses that will outlast us. A legacy of integrity and hard work and community service. And it all started with a desperate young woman and a drifting cowboy who found each other in a dying mountain town. And $12,000 of stolen money," Natalie added with a wry smile. "And $12,000 that bought us the chance to build something that mattered," Jackson corrected gently. "You found the Outlaw's buried loot and used it to build a life. I helped you spend it right. Together we created something beautiful. That is what I will remember. That is what matters." Natalie leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers, feeling the decades of love and partnership that had carried them through everything. "I love you, Jackson Stone. Thank you for everything." "I love you too, Natalie Stone. Thank you for taking a chance on a drifting cowboy who walked into your store looking for work." "Best decision I ever made," she murmured. "Second best," Jackson corrected. "The best was having the courage to dig up that box in the first place. Everything else followed from that." They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. Their children and grandchildren moved around them, a living tapestry of the life they had built together. The store stood solid on Main Street, a monument to transformation and hope. The ranch land stretched to the horizon, productive and thriving. And somewhere, long forgotten and overgrown, a hole in the ground marked the place where a young woman had found her chance at happiness and grabbed it with both hands. Where an outlaw's buried loot had become the seed of something good and lasting. Where a love story had begun that would span 5 decades and create ripples that would extend far beyond anything that desperate young woman could have imagined on that hot August day in 1882. Natalie Reed had found treasure in the mountains, but the real treasure had not been the money. It had been Jackson Stone, and the life they had built together, and the family they had created, and the love that sustained them through 50 years of joy and sorrow and everything in between. That was the true buried treasure, the one that mattered, the one that would last long after the last silver coin had been spent and forgotten. As darkness fell and stars emerged in the vast Colorado sky, Natalie and Jackson sat hand in hand on their porch, surrounded by their legacy, grateful for every moment that had brought them to this place. The outlaw's money was long gone, dispersed and forgotten. But what it had purchased remained eternal: a life built on love, a family rooted in partnership, a legacy of integrity built from compromised beginnings, and a love story that proved sometimes the most beautiful things can grow from the most unexpected seeds. They had spent the outlaw's buried loot right, every penny of it, investing in something that mattered. And in the end, that made all the difference.